I want to welcome everyone today for our wonderful session, which is going to be quite interactive, where we're going to be talking about mixed methods research over your career. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce you or reintroduce you, for some of you who may already know him, Dr. Joe Gallo. Joe and I known each other since I was not as gray, let's put it that way, same height, but not as gray. It has been one of the best. I consider him a dear friend and a dear mentor, and I am so thankful that he's here to tell you about mixed methods research over his career, and then his partner in crime, Tim Guetterman, who I don't know, Tim, if we've had the pleasure of meeting in person before, but I know I've heard your name from Joe so many times, and I know that he is such a huge fan of what you do and how you do your work. So I want to just thank you for being here to do this with us. And then the last person I want to introduce to, and then I'm gonna mute myself and we'll get the conversation going, is Maggie, our own Maggie Butler, who is one of our, as you know, Meet Cohort 5 scholars who's been working with Joe this year, and she's agreed to kind of be our moderator for today's session on mixed methods over your career. So with that, Maggie, I don't know if you have a question you want to kind of kick us off with, or where you'd like us to start.
I think it would be helpful to hear just a little bit from Joe and Tim about the work that you're doing or how you became, experts in mixed methods research. Just introduce yourselves and give us some of your background.
Tim, do you want to go first?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So I'm Tim. I'm in the Department of Family Medicine at the University of Michigan, and I mostly do health services research or work related to education and health. That can be research methods training, more education or health education. So my interest is really in methodology, though, of mixed methods research. So I write a lot about methodology, specifically thinking about how we integrate qualitative and quantitative research in different ways. That's what I'm most passionate about and interested in. So I work on a variety of projects. I think I'm a co-I on 4 different RO1s right now, kind of leading the mixed methods and qualitative aspects. And then I, write my own grants too. I guess does that answer everything, or do you want anything else? Okay, so that's a little bit of what I do.
Well, my venture into mixed methods was very non-linear. And actually, I don't know, Tim, how you initially was part of your dissertation?
No, so actually, I was very quantitatively oriented, and I was working in program evaluation for
Nice.
health and human services, and I was, really into things like structural equation modeling and HLM and propensity score analysis and stuff like that. Um, and one of the programs I was working in was evaluating child welfare programs, or wraparound program, essentially. And I was struck because it's government work, so it would eventually go to the legislature and stuff like that. And I started throwing in quotes from families, and they completely ignored the 50 pages that I prepared, and only focused on that. And I really didn't know what qualitative research was, that it was a thing. I came through more of a quantitative psych background, honestly. And I heard about a program at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in quantitative, qualitative, and psychometric methods. So I actually took a qualitative course as a non-degree student just to kind of check it out. And my professor at the time, John Cresswell, I got to know, and he, suggested I apply for a PhD program. And through that, I just became interested in mixed methods, and that's really all I have done since.
Yeah, well, I, of course, I went to medical school and had no intention of doing a research career, and trained in family medicine, and won't get into that aspect of it. But what happened was I was in the National Health Service Corps, worked in West Virginia, and decided to do an MPH because I thought, wow, what does this statistics mean when you read a paper? And so I went to talk to somebody. We moved back to Baltimore because I had done a residency in Baltimore, and went to talk to somebody at Hopkins about the idea of doing the MPH part-time. There was no part-time MPH, so I was working and did then the MPH. And then in a summer institute class, I met Jim Anthony and Bill Eaton, and they were getting ready to do the ECA, which Brianna will be very familiar with. And they put out a job announcement and I didn't apply. And Jim is like, well, what do you mean you're not applying? Well, so anyway, I did a postdoc in psychiatric epidemiology because it was interesting to me in primary care. I thought, oh, primary care is like the ECA. I mean, it's like the epidemiologic catchment area project, except the respondents come to you. You don't have to go out to the respondents. And so I thought, well, the way they're thinking about, well, what are psychiatric disorders, et cetera, really resonated with me. So maybe like Tim. So I had a mathematical bent, took a lot of math in college. Never, of course, you don't use that in, medical school is mostly pure memorization. But actually learned about structural models and wrote a paper with Jim using what's called a mimic model because of this idea that older people don't express depression. And so we did that, and one thing and another, and found myself in a new family medicine department at Penn, hanging out with medical anthropologists. And I would say when we were doing that structural modeling, I had the idea that how do you even think about how depression might be different in different groups? I thought, well, maybe I should think about older people who grew up in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. They grew up in a different culture. How do people study depression in different cultures? And it came across all this anthropology and actually cited it in my structural equation paper. But then at Penn, I met like living, breathing anthropologists, like Maggie's a living, breathing anthropologist. And so I had a project on depression, spectrum of depression. What is depression? All using, structured interviews. And I met Fran Barg, and she said, well, how about, I was going to do a follow-up interview. And she said, well, how about instead of doing the same questionnaires, we do something that's essentially open-ended. And so we wrote a mixed methods grant as kind of a supplement, and that became the spectrum of depression in late life. And there are a number of papers that came out from that. And that was my introduction to mixed methods. And then in the transition to Hopkins, we have a summer institute. And Tim has been a part of that, and John Creswell was initially, but we had a group of 4 of us that have taught that, and then the mixed methods training program. So, right now I do a lot of mentoring either on Ks or dissertations, and working on a mixed methods project around medical comorbidity and Alzheimer's disease, or a grant. I mean, who knows what's going to happen to that? But that's my story. And I would say, or I forgot to say at the beginning, there's 3 kinds of people in the world: those that can count and those that can't. I'll let that sink in. At a meeting I was at, when I said that, somebody raised their hand and said, well, what's the 3rd kind? So I don't know. They're either brilliant or they didn't get it.
Joe, Tim, can I ask? I was waiting for the joke, Joe. We front loaded this. Can I ask, you've mentioned just your own role in mentoring and training on this. What kind of advice do you give people now that are kind of getting ready to do mixed methods work that maybe you didn't receive, or sort of how is your advice that you give people changed over time? I know this is a hard question to ask because there's so much uncertainty about the future.
Right.
But sort of, if there was some evergreen advice that you feel like, this is something or this is something I used to give people advice on, and I've sort of changed how I think about that problem or think about it supporting them now.
Well, I don't know. I don't know that my advice has changed. Like, what's the question? What's the research question? I mean,
That's the first. So you
I mean, I still,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. That's always the way I've approached it. I mean, that's what drove it for what happened to me. It's just that I met the right people at the right time or with the right, that anthropologists don't think the same way as in epi, say. So that experience sort of, but thinking about that, if you look at the paper that's on mixed methods approach to loneliness or whatever it is in journals of gerontology, I really tried to lay that whole thing out. And in that sense, my advice hasn't changed.
Is it fair to say then that you sort of view it as really just beginning? I mean, I think you said a couple of things in that response. Like one is like it begins with the question, and so maybe I'll ask you sort of to what degree or how, sorry, the other thing I think that I'm trying to get at here is you both sort of began with very quantitative backgrounds and then sort of got into this in a different way. And so maybe
Right.
maybe my question is really about like how is that, do you think that's still a really wise way to approach mixed methods research, that is sort of like have a strong grounding in one way of answering a question and then find the right partners that help you expand it out? To what degree, you run these mixed methods training programs, so that's sort of like very explicitly focused on the different ways, right? Because there's lots of different ways that these two approaches can be understood. So we could sort of begin from that perspective. But then I think the third thing you mentioned is that people think about problems differently. Anthropologists think about problems differently than people in family medicine or program evaluation people, et cetera. And so I could see how having an orientation, how the kind of advice you might give somebody to be able to like be open in a way to this idea might be different today when maybe there's a little bit more acceptance, or maybe there's a little bit, the value is maybe a little bit more obvious into mixed methods research than what it was 20 years ago.
Right. I don't know. I mean, Tim, what do you think? I mean, it's essentially like you're saying, well, what if somebody's primarily trained using, what we call qualitative methods, then do they approach it differently or have a different?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, I think in terms of advice, though, I would think about making sure you have the right people on the team, essentially, and then engaging with cultural humility, those different perspectives. So, you know, typically, like, to do a mixed method study, I mean, it's not a single person, and it's great to be well informed, but still, thinking about having someone who has more expertise in the kind of qualitative research you're doing, the kind of quantitative research you're doing. What I think most people don't think about and give enough attention to when doing mixed methods, though, is really the integration of the two. And I think that leads to missed opportunities. And it does kind of get back to Joe says, what's your research question? But I mean, I see that all the time. It's probably more information you wanted, but I was at SBM last week ago, or I can't remember now, days blur together. But in one poster session, there were I don't know, 75 posters, probably 15 of them to 20 used mixed methods. And I only found one that had any kind of evidence that they integrated the qualitative and quantitative results or data in any way. The rest of them were just sort of, here's what I learned quantitatively and here's what I learned qualitatively, period, as opposed to, kind of a cohesive story that, I think it was kind of a missed opportunity in most of these studies to address deeper questions like, what's the reason that this intervention seems to be working for some but not others, and so on, or what's the reason that explains implementation issues.
Yeah.
There's a question from like I don't know, from someone anonymously, but somewhat related to that point about like missed opportunities for cohesive use of mixed methods. And I'm wondering if there are any other, the question is, what are some mistakes made by those who are new to mixed methods research that I can try to avoid? And I think using the methods cohesively is one of those, but curious if you have other ones that come to mind.
Yeah, I saw that question in the not in the chat, but I mean in the preview that we were given of 4 questions, and I was thinking about that, and couple of things was I as an advertisement, and I think I sent these to Monica. One is that, we did a paper where Tim helped us analyze summary statements from grants that people had submitted to us, funded and unfunded. We asked the whole mixed methods program, can you send us summary statements from projects that you submitted to NIH that were funded or unfunded? And we got, I don't know, about a little over 40 or so summary statements. So it's worth looking at that paper in terms of what the reviewers said. And one of the prominent things that I remember was, and there's probably more, is this not being clear about the link between, let's say, a quantitative, say a survey, and then how you're selecting the qualitative sample. And then the other paper, you may not think it's relevant to this question, but there was a paper by Kelly Ashbrenner was the lead author, again, from the mixed methods program, and looking at pilot studies, how to use mixed methods in pilot studies. And what I like about that paper is it gets very explicit about exactly what do you need to collect depending on the questions and the substance of what you're doing. And that avoids the mistake of just collecting data that's not really helpful to to developing the program, or, that kind of thing. So that would be a mistake. It's sort of collecting sort of diffuse data, or you read grants where that, understanding feasibility or something, it's very vague. It's not really spelled out very well. And I think that paper helps it spell it out. So it's avoiding mistakes in that sense of not knowing what to collect or how to, or overwork. And then I don't know, I had a couple of other things that maybe are kind of corny. One is not being creative enough in writing and communicating about what you're doing, and really not educating the reader, I think of that, or educating the reviewer about the assumption, which is good to do. We don't we may not do that if you're doing like just statistics, but you really should, right? A statistical model is not reality. It's just a model of reality. And maybe the other thing is read a lot of, read a lot of mixed method studies, and you start to get a sense of where integration's occurring and how did they present it. I think the formulas are good, but I I like the idea of thinking of it somewhat as being creative in how you lay it out, and that there could be a lot of mistakes sort of there. I'm probably missing a lot of things, but I,
Yeah, and I definitely agree with the integration or linking. So clearly, and in terms of writing, so I had this one mentor, John Cresswell, who's all about the methods, and then Joe, who's all about the stuff. Like no one really cares as much about that. It's what's the question. But like I learned so much from Joe in reading his writing. And I think one main takeaway, just to be really specific, is things like jargon. There are a lot of terms in mixed methods, kind of a dizzying amount of terms. And for one, it's not good. That can be intimidating for people. It's like, how do I use these? But I think what's most important is that you're just explaining what it is you're actually doing, as opposed to getting too hung up on the terms and jargon. So using that as a chance to educate the reader, like Joe said. And then, the other thing that I'll mention is kind of a common mistake that I see, and it's, often people who are more quantitatively trained, or their background coming over to use mixed methods using qualitative, maybe it's one of their first exposures to it, which is terrific. I mean, it's great. I don't want to discourage that. But a common mistake, I think, is failing to appreciate the labor that's involved with qualitative research. I mean, I have looked at a lot of grants over the years where I will see, the most egregious. I mean, I saw a proposal to interview, egregious isn't the right term, but the most extreme is a proposal to interview something like 800 individuals with semi-structured interviews. And I mean, that's like a lifetime of work for a team. And so, I would think about what's realistic and what could actually be accomplished, and consider the time that it takes to do all of those interviews, and then to actually make sense of that data and do a high quality analysis of it. So that is the common mistake that I see.
well, my personal experience, I forgot to tell you as part of the Spectrum project, when we did that, we were we were funded to do the structured interviews, and then we want to do something else to follow up. And then I met Fran and Fran Barg, who's a medical anthropologist at Penn. Now I think she's retired, but um, it really changed the um, trajectory of things. But so we had an interaction around, oh, what is depression? How do we use these different methods? She introduced me to these other methods, not just the semi-structured interviews, but free listing and other things, which you'll see in that paper if you look it up. But um, after we submitted it, and I'm sure there were other textbooks out, but after we submitted it, this Sage textbook came out, the Tasha Corey and Tedley. It's about this thick. It's a fantastic set of chapters. And I think John Creswell contributed, a lot of people contributed. And I feel so lucky that that came out after we submitted the grant, because if it had come out before, I know me, I'd be reading it. How do we fit into this? How do we fit into that? And it was probably better that it was just organic it reflected the interaction we had, not just me and Fran, but with a little group there at Penn, including Tom Tenhave, who was really a wonderful person, a biostatistician, So we had a table with, two biostatisticians, and a nurse and family doctors and somebody from the community. And, it kind of organically came out of that. And I mean, it's kind of funny when I look back at it now, because I said crazy stuff about convergence, and, we were going to get. Actually, there was a paper looking at latent class model related to the form of depression, but then I said, "Oh, we're gonna analyze the interviews, and then we're gonna quantize that data, and then we're gonna do latent class on that, and then we're gonna compare." I'm talking to Tom. How do we compare like two sets of latent classes? We never did it. but it was in the grant. You know, it's just it was fun, I have to say.
Yeah, I agree. I find it's really fun to do. I don't know, mixed methods work. I think another question that's maybe kind of in the same like vein or thread. Someone asked just for both of you to speak to considerations in publishing qual/quant together versus separately. And I think I like, even as someone who claims to be mixed methods, like would also like to hear your perspectives on this approach, because I think it can be really challenging to like balance it right, to like find the right journal, to find the right reviewers. So I'd love to hear, I don't know, about experiences, considerations, pitfalls.
Well, Tim has a lot of experience because he's an editor on the Mixed Methods Journal.
Sure, I can share first. I think it's always kind of a difficult decision. You know, for one, just there's often just too much to put into a single paper, which is why things get split out into multiple papers, whether it's quantitative and qualitative, um, or whatever. And that's something that, you know, we have done a lot. Teams that I've worked on where, you know, we might have kind of a main paper that's like a mixed methods overview, and then almost more of a deeper dive, if you will, into a qualitative aspect, or, you know, more of a focused follow-up analysis, and then maybe the quantitative results are reported separately. So it's one model to have multiple papers. I get though that there's just a practicality to writing a mixed methods paper and trying to include all of that within tight word counts. It can be really, really hard. And I think that leads people often to split them out and report it separately. It does make me kind of sad when that happens though, because I feel like it's then, you know, missing the whole integration and the value of integration. You know, in some instances, it doesn't matter as much. But again, going back to your question, it's hard to actually report on that then if you're not doing a mixed methods paper. Um, you know, there can be like a sequence to thinking about how you're writing these manuscripts so that you can reference other papers, which is a good practice, of course, to show they're part of a larger study. But then, you know, it can save a little bit of space if you have to recount some of the methods or results or whatever, because you can refer to other papers that have been written. But it certainly, you know, is a challenge. I get that. I just would encourage people to think about trying to write that mixed methods paper, reporting those mixed methods results when possible.
Yeah. Well, no, that's, I mean, not much to add to that, but I would think of the papers perhaps as a story you're telling. In a way, they're like sales pitches. So in that sense, you know, it's not just the challenge of getting both methods in there, but then is it part of the story you're telling? Because there might be stories you tell that only use one part or another, I guess. And so maybe you do, I mean, it's common in a, you know, even large projects, but even in not so large projects to have, say, an Excel sheet, and then you know, sort of traffic control, think of the papers. There are going to be certain main ones that you promised in the application, but I think that's part of the fun, actually, is the challenge of, you know, getting your story. And if it's, you know, so partly that, oh, the other thing is in terms of the journals is who is the audience? Like I would start with that. Who needs to hear your story? And, you know, and start with that and then check out those journals. And, you know, would I not send it to some journal that doesn't look like it's publishing a lot of qualitative? I don't know if I'm not in a hurry and it's the right audience. I mean, I did it with that loneliness paper. I don't know that the journals of gerontology, social sciences had a lot of qualitative at least at that point. But
Can I
yeah.
can I ask a question about and I want to also encourage everybody to also, just as questions are coming up, feel free to unmute and ask,
Yeah.
put it in the chat. One of the other things is somebody who's very quantitative, and I've done some of these sort of like, all right, and then we'll use our quantitative data to like sample, and we'll do some qualitative interviews that are still feel very structured. I've never done like, we have some MIWI scholars who, are ethnographers, and they live with people practically for weeks at a time, kind of observing their, their cooking practices, or observing their, just there's a lot of, so I know that this is like a qualitative research itself is like very heterogeneous, and it can feel very intimidating, I think, as somebody who's for somebody more quantitatively oriented. But I think one of the hardest things about it, I think, is like the reflexivity that is like at a real core part of qualitative work that really isn't something, at least I don't seem to be consciously engaging in very much when I do quantitative work. I'm like, this is the data, this is the model, do these assumptions make sense? Okay, can I live with it? Let's go. And it's like, that's it. Versus for qualitative work, it seems much more, what is my positionality to this research question? What is my positionality to this research participant? What is my positionality to the question itself? How does this, how is the way that I'm, what assumptions am I making as I'm reading this? And so I don't know if you can, it feels to me both like I can see why you keep bringing back this word creativity to that. So I guess I want to kind of ask you to lean into that a little bit more, but also the idea of, I guess I'm wondering about the collaboration in like the push and pull with the other people who are kind of working with you on the project, because these types of projects are, it seems like, impossible to do as a solo person, but it's impossible for kind of a different set of reasons than if it was just like a really big quantitative project. You know what I mean? It's not just like not efficient to do it as one person, but it's not possible. So could you maybe, and Maggie, I don't know if you want to kick us off.
Oh, yeah.
I know you're our QA, but like, or MC, excuse me, but that's one of the things that I think is also it's good to be just very transparent and about what makes that type of approach to science different.
That's a big question, but it's a really important question. And I guess I can speak to it a little bit from like the anthropological perspective, or thinking about like cultural anthropologists and folks who are doing ethnography explicitly. Like if you read those ethnographies, they're not talking to a whole lot of people typically, because if they were to talk to, and they tend to really hone in on like a specific practice within a specific cultural group, or a specific experience within some broader system. And so I think that is representative of the fact that like if we wanted to do, I don't know, purely qualitative or ethnographic work on a really, though I do think this is probably changing a lot in the digital age, and I don't know a ton about digital ethnography, so that's another caveat. But I do think it would be too much to do. And also like folks who are doing ethnography in cultural anthropology are in some ways doing that work kind of more on their own. Like there is less team science, or like less collaboration, or more collaboration with participants versus with other scientists. So I think, but I do know that a lot of the like methods or theories that go into the reflexivity of doing qualitative work are still can be applied, and I think also should be applied to like purely quantitative work too, since we're all humans, we're all doing science, and we always bring our biases into anything we're doing, no matter what it is. So I think that's important to think about, but that's also a very anthropological perspective. I think I'm rambling, so I'll like kick it over to someone else, and then if I think of more things, I'll bring them back up.
Well, I hope the someone else is Tim.
Yeah, reflexivity is not my strong suit either, to be honest with you. I mean, I probably keep it at more of a surface level, honestly, in trying to disclose it, what, say, our professional backgrounds are and stuff like that. I think the thing to remember, though, is that it is kind of a different thinking in qualitative research, that quote unquote bias is not a bad thing. I mean, it's actually a good thing. So if I'm sitting down doing an interview, let's say it's about a health topic and a nurse and I are doing the interview together, the nurse will ask questions that I simply will not ever think of because I'm not trained that way, or if I'm, doing interviews with a physician or whatever. So it's, not necessarily a bad thing. It's a good thing because, people do have that deep knowledge that you're also trying to extract from someone. I do think maybe in qualitative research, we're better about that transparency though, and just saying that, we are coming at it from this background and thinking about it that way. And some people, do a better job than I do, where they'll, literally like list out, what are your preconceived notions or what did you think going into this, and return to that periodically as a way to kind of challenge that. And, I think that's a really, really interesting approach, and it could be helpful. And I mean, I'll mention it, but, also just thinking about different team members and how we have different backgrounds. I mean, it does actually lead to really interesting conversations. So I've done a lot of mixed method studies. So these are called explanatory sequential designs, where you start quantitatively and then move to a qualitative component. So common one I've been part of many times is we start by studying, a system, a hospital, clinics, whatever, figure out which ones are higher performing or lower performing on a certain measure. And then you go out and do interviews to try to understand that variation, for instance. So that's kind of the big picture of what it is. But, one question that comes up, and I've had this conversation over and over again, should the interviewers be masked as to the performance level of the sites you're going to? That it's like a philosophical difference, honestly. And I can see an argument both ways. Personally, I believe we don't know if it's better one way or the other. I think that's a methodological study that could be done. But, it is one of those differences of viewpoints and opinions that really comes up all the time in those type of studies. And in practice, then, I've done it both ways, being completely masked to that, and then other times where we knew ahead of time with a thought that, that helps you formulate what questions to ask as you're going into a different hospital or a different clinic to try to understand, like, what is keeping their performance at this level or not.
Yeah, in the Spectrum project, when we did the qualitative interview, we had a lot of information on everybody, but we didn't reveal that, to the interviewers. But I don't remember the substance, but Brianna may remember, in the ECA, people got interviewed, and then after some certain data was collected, then something was revealed that then, but I don't know if that's exactly reflexivity, but that I mean, in health studies research, yeah, you're not living with the person. I mean, there could be studies where you're living with the person observing, but for the most part, things that I've been involved, but the reflexivity part's really important. Maybe I'm talking to a patient with completely different kind of experience, and I'm completely missing the boat with my, with my questions. I don't know. I mean, and again, this may not be related to, but one thing you reminded me with this, being blind. The other thing is this idea of reliability. Like, how do you
Yeah.
think of that? When our group, when we were at Penn, people had, may have had different opinions, but there's this sense, I don't know, when you write a paper, or when it always comes up, if you're doing coding and you want certain level of reliability. But I could think of why, well, you sort of alluded to it, Tim, right? Like a nurse might have a different perspective on how they code something. That's not necessarily wrong.
Mhm.
But I know that's not really that's not exactly what reflexivity, maybe it's a reflection
No.
of
Well, but
reflexivity.
I think that's getting at a couple of different things. And I think, you kind of both alluded to the jargon and sort of the need to just like be really transparent in explaining what you're doing, because I think yeah, for me, I mean, similarly, I'm like, well, what's the, you know, the inter-rater reliability of our coding scheme? And for some people, that's not a very important question, you know, whereas like if you're doing survey research, that's a very important value to report. And in fact, you would say if somebody didn't report that, that was a less rigorous study. So it's not
Mhm.
just like, oh, that's something missing. It's like, no, this is actually like an indictment of the validity of your overall approach to answering this question. So it's really, to me, like very fundamental. And so, but I think what the beauty of it is, and I guess maybe, you know, everyone's already on the same page about this, but like, that's why you're here, is that the mixed methods research, like really the creativity part of it does allow you, like I kept thinking as you were speaking about, you know, like, okay, we go from in quantitative research, this is the hypothesis, and it's like compared to the null, right? So I have a very particular question that I'm answering, and that's the only question that I'm answering. There's no other question, you know,
Right.
and that answer is a yes or a no, and that's it. This is just such a very different, and we consider that like there's obviously a lot of value put on that for some reason, right? For some questions that is important to know it in the answer in that way. So I'm going to try to return to my first question again, which was like a little bit, I think I've got it formulated a little bit more, which is like, so I'll ask it this way. Are there questions that earlier in your career, you answered in either purely a quantitative way, since you were both kind of trained quantitatively, or purely qualitative way, that you wish you had the tools that you have now to be able to answer in this type of approach? And why is that a question that you think would have benefited from a more mixed method approach now, but at the time either you didn't have the resources or you just didn't have the right partners to do it in that way?
But I feel like that's a daily occurrence for me advising students who are doing dissertations. You know, there's not enough resources or whatever, but I mean, I can't think of examples offhand, but I know like, oh, actually the student whose exam is tomorrow, her final thing. And not to get into details, which I wouldn't remember anyway, but it was basically about, do the patients agree with the doctors about the severity of their illness? And so you look, you know, different factors, black, white, whatever. But you know, when you look at the thing, it says, oh, these people, you know, they thought it was more severe than the doctor thought, or whatever. It's a shame. Would have been good if you could have interviewed them, right? You would have learned a lot. Otherwise, you're doing what she's doing, you know, which actually between us, I remember Bill Eaton doing in a meeting where you start like speculating, oh, you know, my mother-in-law, XYZ, you know, that kind of thing, you know. And actually, I read about that in that textbook I was saying that came out when we submitted the grant. I don't know where it was. It was a chapter in there that said, and it just reminded me of Bill Eaton because it said, oh, people around a table, you know, they start, um, you know, speculating. But I would wonder, you know, Tim, you're going to see a lot of these papers. I mean, I only see the ones that I'm involved in, where reviewers actually ask about the reliability. You know, they'll ask sometimes. And so, like, so you almost sort of have to do something to be able to give them an answer.
Yeah, definitely on that note, I mean, I think it is a different way of thinking. So, you know, usually people, or I mean, I've written this too, respond more that it's a consensus process and, you know,
Yeah.
questioning, you know, can you really determine reliability? I mean, how valid is it to say that something is an agreement? You're not comparing a rating of 2 to a rating of 2 on the Likert type scale from two separate judges. You know, you're comparing words and, you know, segments of text and, you know, words that can be used a little bit differently and synonyms and that sort of thing. So it really is more of a fuzzy comparison. But yeah, still there are reviewers who will, you know, really ask for that and they really want that, you know, percent agreement or reliability calculation.
Oh, before I forget, there is a book about this stuff we're talking about that I thought was really, really good. That Britt actually, Maggie, Britt recommended to me. it's called The Science of Qualitative Inquiry. I think that's the name of it, by this guy, Martin Packer, who, I don't know, some professor in the Midwest, but is really good because he really lays out some good assumptions about the things we're talking about. And he also points out that, which you sort of alluded to, Maggie, that, hey, you know what? This stuff we're talking about, it's not like when you do a survey with close-ended responses, that's not subject to bias and stuff that goes on between people. And he does a really good job of laying that out, and the fact that that's not made so explicit. You're just gathering this stuff that, sort of looks like it's very reliable and things agree with each other, but actually it's problematic. Really good book. I wish I could remember exactly everything that I read, but yeah, that's the book. Yeah, that's it.
Well, I love section 1 or part 1, the objective study of subjectivity. That just
Yeah,
seems interesting.
yeah.
Cool. Does anyone on the call want to ask any questions? I realize that we didn't really I don't know, leave a lot of space for that, but love to hear from other folks. Or if you want to put it in the chat and I can read it if you don't want to ask or unmute. And then also, I don't know, Joe or Tim, if you had any other things you wanted to add to the 4 questions that people asked. I think the only one that you mentioned a little bit were trainings that you offer, but one of the questions is about training opportunities and resources that are available on mixed methods for early career researchers.
Well, that's a sore point for me.
Yeah, I know I'm
But
asking this at maybe the worst
yeah,
time.
I mean, I know what I know that we looked at. Tim, you may know more. There were when we submitted the thing for the renewal, Tim, I think there were like 8 or 10 maybe I came across. They were only 2 of them were focused on health per se. Um, and maybe there was 1 or 2 that was totally online, but I don't know. You may know more, Tim.
Yeah. Can I share my screen?
Yeah.
Just
Oh,
to
it's
kind
okay
of,
with me.
is that
Sure.
okay?
I'm saying yeah.
Is it,
Right.
you should have permission. Do you have?
Looks like I do. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. So I don't know. I just wanted to, it's a good question. So and I can send me the links,
No.
but so Joe mentioned the summer course at Hopkins. So this is within a summer institute. It's a course that Joe leads every summer, and I taught in it. Britt usually teaches in it as well. They're open to anyone.
Yeah.
At U of M, we have a couple of mixed methods offerings too. So through our mixed methods program, we offer workshops. So these are about 2.5-day workshops several times a year. There are some short courses. So there's a summer session in epidemiology that has a mixed methods 1-week workshop. I didn't put it on here, but there is another mixed method certificate that Daphne Watkins leads at U of M. The only reason it's not on here is because she's still, the dates are pending. I think it's probably going to be in August. It was usually in June, but I didn't mention that just because I don't know exactly when. And then at Stanford, yes, please do. There's a mixed methods workshop if anyone's in the area. It's usually in April. Arden Morris, she's a surgeon at Stanford. She leads this and coordinates. I've been out to it a few times. These are open to anyone, though. They're really cross-disciplinary, even though they're sort of housed within a different area. In terms of learning more, I always point people back to the best practices for mixed methods research. So this is something that the NIH, and Joe, you were part of it, so please correct me, but it was commissioned by the Office of Behavioral and Social Science Research. It's a free document. It's downloadable as a PDF, or you can look at it on the website, but it's nice. It gives like guidance, and it's really meant to help both people writing grants and then also reviewers in thinking about mixed methods research. There is a professional association. It's not very expensive to join. I want to say like $65, but the only reason I mention it is because it's a MOOC course. It's like an online self-paced course in mixed methods. You can learn about different topics. So mmira.org will get you there. And then, just finally, there are a ton of books about mixed methods. Joe has mentioned some of these already. So this one up here, it's kind of blurry, but it's Foundations of Mixed Methods. It's into a subsequent edition now. It's a good starting point. Another one that I like to recommend, it's on the right-hand side. It's sort of this dark black color, but it's a concise introduction to mixed methods research by John Cresswell.
Yeah.
And it's a short book, and he wrote it to be read in about 3 hours by someone who's proficient in English. I'll say that. But it's a good resource. But like all of these I have here are good, and I mean, there are different thinkings on mixed methods, different ways to approach it. So, if you want something that's much more philosophically based, this book down here by Jennifer Green, Mixed Methods and Social Inquiry, it's a very different way of thinking about mixed methods, but it's really cool to read about these different approaches, but they all really stress integration and the value of integration.
Well, I would emphasize John Creswell's book that you have there with the swirls on it.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's not very expensive. It's paperback. It'll take you through all of the steps and the designs and some advanced designs. It's really a good starting point. I mean, the introductory one is very good too, if you have really no background or experience. Either one of them, there's more detail in that blue one. But I mean, that's where I would start because, and the other one that I would point out also is this one that's right below it. That's by Leslie Curry.
Yeah, that's right here. Yep, this is it. It's
kind
of swirly.
They have more, examples in there related to health services research. I think there might even be an example of a K award and stuff like that. Maybe shouldn't really be dated. I think most of the things should still apply. It's been around for a while, right? But it's COVID. Well, they all are.
Yeah, but I don't think it's outdated or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's a good book.
This one down here with the bridge on it, that's the one that came out after we submitted our grant.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first edition of that, I think.
Well, and as we're getting close to the hour, I want to come back to one thing which I do think is a really interesting space, and it really makes you realize how, even if talking to people, which if that's how you can kind of impoverishedly describe qualitative research, even though it's been around since for a long time, that had, this idea of the digital space and how people communicate in digital language and what does that, I think that's a really interesting space. I myself am for the first time now working with the U of M has a GPT that we are giving it these qualitative narratives of suicide deaths. We have over 500,000, and we're asking it what it sees and telling it to look for certain things. And that's a very integrative back and forth. We literally just had an hour-long meeting yesterday where we did not come to a conclusion. The question is, what is an event? Because we have this narrative that describes what's happening in people's lives at the time of their death. And we're trying to teach this GPT to tell us whenever it sees an event. And we realized we did not have a definition of that. And so we got to maybe it should have some There was a before and then there was an after. And if there we could clearly say that that's an event. But I guess I just want to emphasize, you know, when that this I think that there's a lot of different ways that technology is probably needs to come alongside, or at least be sort of maybe in the mix. I don't think that you should get rid of talking to people by any means, but certainly like probably in the mix, because I think that there's going to be a need for smart people who know how to talk to people as this tech stuff starts really becoming part of our lives. So but my favorite qualitative studies I ever read was, and I'm going to bring this back because I think sometimes we think like, oh, qualitative is only for like social behavioral questions, whatever, but it was about the training of surgeons who are left-handed. Because of course, most surgeons are right-handed, right? Most people are right-handed. So most surgeons are right-handed. But so that means most left-handed people are going to get trained by a right-handed surgeon.
True.
And that's a really difficult thing to do. I mean, I am very right-handed dominant. So but they use this qualitative approach to try to understand like how these different-handed people were navigating this learning environment, this learning challenge that, you know, is in, and I can't imagine a quantitative way to really understand how to solve that problem. I could see quantitative data as a way to identify that problem, but not a way to solve that problem. So I just want to sort of share that as an example of, like, in some ways, like a very simple problem, but a very, very important problem, you know, because otherwise we basically like just lose all left-handed people from the practice of, of surgery.
Right.
So, so we are at 5 o'clock. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I want to say thank you so much, Joe and Tim and Maggie, for helping to facilitate today's discussion and for being willing to share your knowledge with us.